The day the HOA bulldozed my dam, the frogs went silent. That should have been the first warning. I stood at the edge of the swampy stretch behind my house, jaw clenched, watching the mud bubble and churn where my dam used to be. 3 bulldozers, 2 flatbed trucks, and one extremely self-important woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat had just flattened the only thing keeping this neighborhood dry. Her name was Francine Lott. Middle-aged, loud, and somehow always smelling faintly of lemon-scented floor cleaner, Francine ran our homeowners association like a dictatorship with a clipboard. She had a voice sharp enough to cut drywall and a permanent scowl like she'd just tasted sour milk. "This eyesore is finally gone," she declared like she'd just liberated Paris. "You're welcome, everyone." I clenched my fist so hard I nearly cracked a knuckle. That dam wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was nearly 8 years of work engineering, permits, drainage calculations, and sweat. I'm Reagan Voss, a civil engineer, and I built it myself after a freak seasonal flood turned this whole area into a marsh. My property sat on the lowest elevation in the neighborhood, so the runoff pooled here before sliding into the creek. Francine, of course, didn't want to hear any of that. "It's ugly," she said at the last HOA meeting. "It lowers property values. Our community has a look, Reagan." "You mean dry basements. That's the look I'm going for," I shot back. She didn't laugh. She never did. I gave them the permits. I showed them the water flow models. I even brought in the city inspector, who confirmed the dam was legal and functioning perfectly. But Francine didn't care. She waved around some outdated clause in the bylaws about unauthorized landscaping, got her loyal sycophants on the board to vote, and that was that. They sent me a letter, remove the structure within 10 days or the HOA will take action. I appealed. They ignored it. Then, without warning, they showed up with machines and tore it all down. Now, mud replaced the dam. And beneath that, a water table ready to rise like a vengeful ghost. Francine strutted toward me like she was walking a runway. "You should be thanking us, Reagan. This neighborhood is going to look so much more harmonious without that thing." I stared at her. "You just compromised the entire drainage system." "Oh, please." "You engineers love to exaggerate." I didn't respond. What was the point? You can't argue with someone who thinks a Pinterest board qualifies as civil planning. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the backyard, flashlight in hand, listening to the soft squelch of water creeping in. By morning, the first signs started, lawn edges sagged, low lots pooled, sump pumps across the neighborhood kicked on like a chorus. And then, right as the sun cracked over the horizon, the real show began. Francine's $1 million colonial white shutters, wraparound porch, brand new stone pavers sat directly in the path of the redirected water. The ground beneath it was clay heavy and lazy, the kind that doesn't drain. And now, without my dam holding the runoff back, it had found a new place to settle. Her back lawn sagged like a wet sponge. Then it buckled. I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee as the first corner of her patio cracked off and slid 6 feet into the muck. She screamed. It was going to be a very interesting week. By noon, the Lott residents had a moat. I stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, watching the water lap at the base of her decorative garden lanterns. The perfectly trimmed hedges she bragged about during every HOA walk through now leaned like drunks clinging to a fence post. The patio furniture floated in lazy circles. And still, Francine kept up appearances, pacing her porch in a crisp linen outfit like this was all part of a redesign. "Reagan," she called, voice thinner than usual. "Can I speak with you?" I walked over slowly, boots squelching in the softening sod. She gestured for me to step onto her porch, but I stayed right where the concrete ended. My patience wasn't waterproof. "We're looking into options," she began, clasping her hands together like a real estate agent trying to close a deal no one wanted. "But I wanted to ask purely hypothetically if you had any suggestions on temporary flood mitigation." "Sure," I said. "Move to Arizona." Her lips twitched, but not into a smile. "This isn't productive." Neither is bulldozing engineered infrastructure without a hydrology report, I said. Oh, and by the way, code enforcement called me this morning. They're confused. Apparently their office never approved the demolition. She stiffened. I filed a public records request, I continued. Guess what was missing from the HOA's file? A legal demolition permit, but you already knew that. Her hands dropped to her sides. Don't be dramatic. We had a vote. You had a vote, I said, on a structure built entirely on my private property with stamped permits from the city. That's not a vote. That's criminal trespass and destruction of protected work. Francine glanced at the water pooling near her AC unit. The unit made a sad, buzzing sound before shutting off entirely. You should know, I added, that I've already filed a police report. You can expect a visit. You're doing this to spite me. No, I said. I'm doing this because I have a foundation and you don't. She turned and walked back inside without another word. By mid-afternoon, I wasn't the only one getting phone calls. The neighbors were panicking. One by one, they came sloshing through the neighborhood in rain boots, knocking on each other's doors. I watched from my porch as people compared photos of puddles in their crawl spaces, soggy insulation, and buckling floorboards. Every single one of them had voted to remove the dam. Now they wanted answers. That evening, a town hall meeting was hastily assembled in the community clubhouse, a stucco building with faux columns and a leaky roof. The usual round tables had been stacked against the wall. Folding chairs faced a single table at the front, where Francine and two other board members sat looking like kids caught cheating mid-exam. The room reeked of mildew and perfume. I didn't sit. I leaned against the back wall with a legal folder under one arm. The crowd buzzed with frustration, but no one spoke until a lanky guy in a maintenance uniform raised his hand. Are we going to talk about the fact that my living room smells like pond water? He said. Or are we pretending this isn't happening? Francine cleared her throat. We are fully aware of the situation and are exploring remediation options. You mean the situation where you tore down an engineered dam without authorization, flooded half the neighborhood, and now we're on the hook for damages? Someone else asked. We acted in the interest of aesthetics and property values, she said. Property values, shouted a woman near the front. My basement flooded, my drywall's ruined. My insurance says it's an act of negligence, and now they're investigating who's liable. Several people turned to look at me. Francine noticed too. Let's not forget, she said, that the dam was never formally approved by the HOA. I pushed off the wall and walked forward, the room falling quiet as I opened my folder. That's irrelevant, I said. Here's the city engineer's stamp, here's the soil analysis. Here's the county runoff plan showing why the dam was necessary. And here, I held up a stack of documents, is the letter from my attorney confirming that the HOA board violated municipal code, trespassed on private property, and authorized unlicensed demolition. Francine's face paled. Also, I added, I spoke with Officer Diaz of the county sheriff's office. He's opened an investigation. You'll be hearing from him. The room exploded in murmurs. A man in a fishing vest stood up. Wait, so the HOA is personally liable for the damage, not just the HOA, I said. Any board member who voted for the demolition without verifying permits or consulting legal counsel. Francine tried to stand. That's not how liability works. You sure about that? I asked. Because the HOA's insurance provider just suspended your policy pending review. I assume you got that email too. She sat back down like someone had pulled the air out of her. Someone else stood. I want to vote to dissolve the board. You can't, Francine started. We can, said an older woman near the back, per the bylaws with a 2/3 majority. Hands shot up. I counted 17. More than enough. Francine stood again, but this time without confidence. Fine, you want to dissolve the board, go ahead, but you'll still have to deal with the consequences. The water's already inside the foundations. Mold, rot, lawsuits. You think a new board's going to fix that? No, I said. But a new board won't make it worse. 2 days later, Francine was removed from her position. Her house, now surrounded by temporary sandbags and a growing mosquito population, had become the neighborhood cautionary tale. The new board, led by the guy in the fishing vest, whose name turned out to be Harold, voted unanimously to let me rebuild the dam. This time, with full community support. I didn't charge them for the labor, but I did send Francine an invoice for materials. It took 3 days before the sheriff's deputy knocked on Francine's door. By then, the mosquitoes were so thick around her place that the city had issued a public nuisance warning. I watched from my porch as the deputy, a tall man with a wiry mustache and a clipboard, stood just far enough back from the porch to avoid the rising stink wafting from her waterlogged yard. Francine didn't answer the first knock, or the second. On the third, the door creaked open, and she appeared in a robe and plastic sandals, eyes bloodshot, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that didn't hide the exhaustion. The deputy said something, flipped through his clipboard, and handed her a thick envelope. She looked down at it like it might explode. She didn't look up, not even when he pointed toward my house. By sunset, she was no longer pretending she had everything under control. A moving truck arrived the next morning. Not the big kind, the kind people rent when they're not sure how long they'll be gone. She stuffed it with boxes, file folders, and what looked like a decorative mirror she'd once used to glare at neighbors during HOA inspections. I didn't wave. She didn't look up, but that wasn't the end of it. Not close. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a city official named Maribel Cortez. She introduced herself as a compliance officer from the County Development and Code Enforcement Division. She wanted to meet at the property line. When she arrived, she stepped out of a dusty government SUV, wearing a blazer too formal for the heat and carrying an iPad loaded with satellite images. She pointed to a series of flagged map layers, overlaying water flow with property boundaries and utility lines. "Something's not right," she said, tapping the screen. "Your dam sat entirely on your parcel, but when we looked at the demolition records, what little there were, we noticed something odd. The equipment used entered from the east slope. That's city-managed land." I leaned over her shoulder. "That's protected greenbelt. No one's allowed to operate heavy machinery on it without a public works permit." She nodded. "Exactly. And we issued no such permit, which means the demolition crew trespassed on municipal land to gain access to destroy a private structure. Without legal authority." I didn't say anything. I knew what she was about to say next, and I wanted to hear it from her. "We've opened a formal investigation," she said. "If your former HOA president falsified access permissions, that's a felony. And if she hired an unlicensed contractor to carry it out, that brings in civil liability too." I raised an eyebrow. "You're saying she forged authorization to access city land?" "We're saying," she replied carefully, "that someone submitted a forged work order with a fake approval signature. And we've already referred it to the district attorney's office." I exhaled slowly. "You have any idea how deep this goes?" Maribel looked up at me, eyes sharp. "If I did, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be wearing gloves and carrying a warrant." The next week was a blur of depositions, interviews, and subpoenaed documents. Turns out, Francine hadn't just overstepped. She'd orchestrated the entire demolition through a shell contractor, a landscaping company registered under her cousin's name out of state. No active license, no insurance, and no legitimate business address. The kicker: she submitted reimbursement requests to the HOA for over $20,000, marked as aesthetic restoration and compliance landscaping. When the new board found the receipts, they handed everything to the authorities. Harold, the newly elected president, called an emergency meeting in the community clubhouse. This time, the air was different. No one brought snacks. No one smiled politely. Everyone came with copies of their homeowner's insurance policies and questions about liability coverage. "We were almost complicit," Harold said as he stood behind the folding table. If we hadn't voted to dissolve the previous board when we did, those reimbursement payouts would have cleared. That would have made us accessories. A woman in the front row raised her hand. So what now? Lawsuits, repairs. I've got black mold climbing up into my kitchen cabinets. We've already contacted a mitigation company, Harold said. They're going to do a full assessment of every affected home. Reagan has offered to oversee the new drainage plan and rebuild the dam. And the city's agreed to assist with a grant if we can show the flooding was caused by illegal land disruption. Then he looked at me. You still up for it? I nodded. I'll need access to the old runoff data and at least 3 days without rain. After that, I can get it done in under a week. The room broke into cautious applause, not loud, but real. As I gathered my things afterward, a man in a green baseball cap approached. I hadn't seen him at the earlier meetings. You're Reagan, he asked. Yeah, I'm Todd. I live on the far west side near the creek bend. I've been keeping quiet, but I've got something you'll want to see. He pulled out his phone and tapped into his photo library. What he showed me made my stomach turn. A series of time-stamped photos taken from his attic window showed the demolition crew arriving at dawn. But it wasn't just the bulldozers. There were 2 board members standing near the site, clipboard in hand, pointing and giving instructions. Not just Francine. The treasurer and the secretary. Both of whom had quietly resigned after the vote to dissolve. You think they knew what they were doing? I asked. Todd nodded. I overheard them talking the night before. They said if they didn't move fast, you'd find a way to block it legally. They didn't care about runoff. They just wanted the junkyard gone. I sent the photos directly to Marable. Within 48 hours, the DA's office issued warrants for both former board members. Destruction of protected infrastructure, criminal conspiracy, fraudulent use of HOA funds, trespassing on municipal land. The community watched as unmarked cars pulled up to their homes and led them out in handcuffs. The quiet ones gasped. The louder ones took photos. No one tried to stop it. After that, the neighborhood shifted. People who'd once waved politely but kept to themselves started talking more. Organizing, asking questions. We formed a volunteer oversight group not to run the HOA but to keep it honest. Harold called it checks and balance daycare. I rebuilt the dam in 6 days, wider and stronger than before. This time, I added a proper spillway and a bioswale lined with native reeds to help filter overflow. Kids came out to watch. Some even helped carry stones. When the water stabilized and the surrounding lots began to dry, we planted a pollinator garden along the ridge. Monarchs started showing up within a week. Francine never returned. Her house sat empty for months before the bank finally repossessed it. No one bid on it at auction. Mold had swallowed half the interior, and the foundation had cracked from prolonged saturation. The place was declared uninhabitable. The city eventually used emergency funds to demolish it. In its place, they installed a small community garden and a bench overlooking the new dam. Someone painted a sign beside it that read, "Hydrology happens. Plan accordingly." I never found out what happened to Francine after the charges. Rumor had it she took a plea deal, agreed to pay restitution, and moved to a condo in a city with no HOA. Wherever she ended up, I doubted she'd be organizing board meetings anytime soon. As for the rest of us, we finally understood something we never had before. Power doesn't belong to people with clipboards and confidence. It belongs to those who show up, speak up, and stand their ground even when they're ankle-deep in swamp water. The garden bloomed faster than expected. By early spring, the bench overlooking the reed-lined dam became a neighborhood gathering spot. Kids chased butterflies through the tall grasses, and on weekends, Harold brought his fishing rod and cast lines into the deeper pockets of the runoff channel, mostly for the excuse to sit and talk. We had a rotating cleanup crew. Neighbors who once barely nodded at each other now coordinated trash pickups and weed control like it was second nature. The air even smelled better, somehow less chlorinated, more alive. But then the subpoenas started arriving. They came in thick, cream-colored envelopes with embossed seals, some from the county, others from the state's attorney general's office. I watched from my front porch as envelopes were slid into mailboxes, clutched tightly by stunned hands, or dropped on driveways as homeowners just stood, blinking. This wasn't over, not yet. Harold knocked on my door the next morning. "They're going after the money," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Not just the reimbursements, the whole budget, past 5 years." I shut the door and handed him the folder I'd been preparing. "They'll find what they're looking for." He opened it, leafing through the ledger copies, scanned meeting notes, and the flagged payments I'd traced back to companies with no tax IDs. His brow furrowed at a line item labeled Architectural Harmony Initiative. $15,000, I said. Paid to a consulting firm with a disconnected phone number. The address was a UPS box 2 towns over. I cross-referenced the P.O. box holder. Harold looked up. "Who?" "Francine's brother-in-law." He applied for a business license the same week the board approved the payment. He sat down hard in the kitchen chair. "How deep does this go?" "Farther than anyone thought," I said. "They weren't running an HOA, they were laundering money through fake projects and vanity upgrades. The landscaping improvements were cover. And we all paid into it," he said, staring at nothing. "Until we didn't," I replied. Over the next few weeks, the investigation widened. The state's forensic accountant uncovered a pattern of inflated contractor bids, duplicate payments, and phantom maintenance jobs. One particularly bold invoice claimed $5,000 for aquatic vegetation treatment in a neighborhood with no ponds until my dam was built, of course. I was called to testify before a grand jury. The courtroom wasn't dramatic, no sweeping speeches, just facts, documents, timelines. The assistant DA, a precise woman named Eliza Grant, walked through the evidence piece by piece. I answered questions about the dam, the permits, the aftermath, and the night I first realized what Francine had done. I didn't embellish. I didn't speculate. I let the paper trail do the talking. Afterward, Eliza met me in the hallway. "You did good," she said. "You understand this might set precedent, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "HOAs don't usually see criminal charges for financial misconduct," she explained. "But this is organized fraud with environmental violations and property damage. It's rare we get a case this clean." I nodded. "Clean's a funny word for this mess." She smiled faintly. "Still, you helped turn it into something we could act on." Within a month, indictments were issued. 5 former board members, including Francine, her cousin, and her brother-in-law, were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal misappropriation of funds, and unlawful destruction of protected infrastructure. The city added civil suits for unauthorized use of public land and environmental damage. I didn't see Francine in person again, but her attorney made a statement during the arraignment. She claimed she'd been misled by contractors and pressured by board members to move quickly. The judge didn't buy it. Bail was denied for 2 of them, citing risk of flight. Insurance companies began issuing letters to homeowners, some denying coverage due to the HOA's illegal activity, others demanding restitution from the association's remaining funds. It hit everyone hard. But instead of turning on each other, the neighborhood doubled down. We held a meeting not in the clubhouse, which still smelled like mildew, but outside by the dam. Folding chairs formed a wide semicircle. No podium, no table, just people and purpose. "We're not going to pretend this didn't happen," Harold said, standing in front of the bench. "But we're going to fix it, together." A retired CPA volunteered to audit the books going back 10 years. A construction foreman offered to inspect drainage systems house by house, free of charge. 2 teachers formed a rotating child care group so parents could attend rebuilding meetings. And I was asked unanimously to be the new architectural review chair. I hesitated. "I don't care what anyone's fence color is," I said. "I'm not going to write people up for wind chimes or garden gnomes." Someone from the back laughed. "We're counting on it." So I accepted. But I made one condition clear: no more secret meetings, no more ambiguous bylaws, and no more unchecked authority. Every decision would require open discussion and majority approval, and every dollar spent would be accounted for. We rewrote the rules from the ground up. The bylaws were stripped of vague language. The clause that allowed board members to enter private property without notice was deleted. Fines were capped, appeals streamlined, and any architectural restriction that couldn't be justified by safety or structural integrity was tossed. We even added a clause that required an independent audit every 2 years mandatory. The city took notice. Eliza Grant invited Harold and me to speak at a regional housing conference, not as victims, but as examples of what happens when communities reclaim control. We gave a short talk titled "Civic Vigilance: When the Neighborhood Fights Back." People took notes. Some asked for copies of our new bylaws. One guy from a suburb outside Dallas offered to fly me in to help his neighborhood organize. I declined. I had a dam to maintain. Rain came heavy that spring, but the water held. The spillway worked exactly as designed, channeling runoff into the bioswale and down through the creek. Not a single basement flooded, not a single foundation cracked. Even the frogs came back. One evening, as I checked the water levels, a girl from 3 houses down rode her bike up the gravel path and stopped beside me. "My teacher said you saved the neighborhood," she said. I shook my head. "Nope, we all did." She looked out over the reeds. "It's prettier than it used to be." I smiled at that, not because it was true, though it was, but because she was the first to say it without thinking about bylaws or property value. She just saw it for what it was, something alive. Francine eventually took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 18 months in state prison and ordered to pay restitution over $100,000. Her co-conspirators received similar sentences, scaled to their roles. The HOA recovered a portion from seized assets and used it to fund repairs for the worst-hit homes. The clubhouse was remodeled into a community center, complete with bookshelves, a coffee machine, and a permanent display of the new charter signed by every resident. We called it the Reckoning Wall, and on it, in bold letters above the documents, someone had etched a quote: "Power unchecked will always sink, communities don't have to." I don't know who wrote it, but I knew what it meant. The dam still stands, stronger than ever. Not just the one of stone and soil, but the one built from neighbors who learned, sometimes the hard way, that standing together means more than standing pretty. No one worries about the swamp anymore. We learned how to drain it.